Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tara and I'm the account manager here at Charity Digital. I'll be your host and would like to give you all a really warm welcome to today's session. So as we get started, please do go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat session, in the chat box, and we'd love to know where you're joining us from today. And firstly, I'll start off while people are joining by giving a quick intro to Charity Digital. So we are a UK registered charity ourselves, and our mission is to help other charities to increase their impact by being more digital. So we do this through two sort of main activities. The first one is providing access to software products that charities need at dramatically reduced prices. And the second is through publishing articles, podcasts, videos, etc., and running webinar sessions such as this one today, and events to educate charity professionals and volunteers on how to make better use of digital tools and technologies. So today's session is going to be on how to be a digital leader in 2025, and it's going to be run by Josh Palmer, who is Head of Content at OnBoard. And Josh will also be joined by Zoe Amar, who is Director at Zoe Amar Digital and also Trustee here at Charity Digital as well. So Josh and Zoe will be, of course, chatting through the topic of what it means to be a digital leader, and the session will also cover trends shaping digital transformation, such as AI in the boardroom, and key pillars of digital strategy, including culture and data-driven decision making. So just before we get started and I hand over, I just want to take a brief moment to run through some house rules and pointers for today's session. So the session today is being recorded and will be uploaded to watch on demand within a week's time. Any session slides and resources will also be made available to you. So if you've missed anything along the way, then please do not worry. Closed captions are also available for today's session. To enable these, please go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click on the up arrow button next to closed caption, and then show subtitle. During the webinar, please do ask lots of questions through the Q&A section. So sometimes we see them coming in through the chat. Please do use the Q&A section so that we can ensure they aren't missed. And then we will have a Q&A segment at the end for Josh and Zoe to answer those at the end of their initial presentation. If anyone asks a question and it particularly resonates with you, then please do use the thumbs up icon to upvote it, and we'll make sure we get to those ones first. And finally, if you do encounter any sound or image issues, please do let us know in the chat, and we'll do our very best to get the session back up and running as soon as possible. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Josh and Zoe.
Great. Thank you, Tara. Speaking of audio and visual issues, just having trouble finding the mute button there. Even after 4 years of Zoom webinars, I still have trouble finding it. My name is Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content for OnBoard Meetings. We are a board governance platform, software portal. I'm very happy to be joining you today. If you can tell, I'm joining you from the United States. Very happy to be in the room with Zoe. Zoe, thank you so much for joining us and allowing us to explore the topic of digital transformation and how to be a digital leader in 2025.
Pleasure, great to be here. Thanks for the warm welcome, Josh.
Yeah. So as Sarah mentioned, we're talking about how to be a digital leader in the charity sector, and this will be in the format of kind of a fireside chat between you and I. And I obviously have some data and some outcomes that we've gathered from our surveys. You have the recent report from Charity Digital. I guess we could just start off with the very top line question. Zoe, what does it mean to be a digital leader in the charity sector?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because for me, digital leadership is really just modern leadership now. But there are three key things which I've noticed amongst leaders who I think are driving really good transformative change in digital and AI across the sector. And I suspect these characteristics would be shared by good digital leaders outside the sector as well. So I like to call this the three C's. And the first C is about curiosity. So I was speaking to a CEO earlier this week who is really keen to understand the trends coming down the track in terms of digital service delivery and examples from other sector, and also how AI might change the kind of work that his charity offers to others. So that real focus on horizon scanning and what's next and how can I prepare for it and how can I support my charity in doing so is really important. And then the second C is about culture. It's about creating the right culture where you're really putting learning from staff and volunteers as much as senior people at the heart of it. And one of the best examples of that I know is Michelle Hill, who's the fantastic CEO of a Manchester-based charity called TLC, Talk, Listen, Change. They do a lot of work around relationships. And she has been so brilliant, particularly on their AI journey, at encouraging her staff to try out AI and to share what they're learning, also to enable them to experiment safely and ethically. So it's not free for all. It's really about how can we make staff feel seen and comfortable and give them the right guidance so that they have a good environment to try new things, but also know what they can't do and feel empowered to share what they've learned. And then the third thing, and Josh, you mentioned our charity digital skills report earlier. For me, it's about clarity. And one of the biggest challenges we have seen for the last 5 or 6 years in the charity digital skills report is that charities really want their CEOs and their boards to define a very clear vision for success. Where are we going with digital? What does this look like? How will we know when we've got there? So having that clarity around what success looks like, but also that personal self-awareness about your own leadership as part of that. What don't I know? What doesn't our charity know? One of the phrases that comes up so much when I work with leaders is, we don't know what we don't know. And that is a really key bridge to cross, as you'll know from your own work, Josh. So yes, for me, it's all about curiosity, culture, and clarity of vision.
Yeah, I'd love to double down on or double click into that clarity of vision. And it seems that, there's kind of two paths that technology adoption takes in any organization, but also in charities. There's typically a bottoms up, where maybe the volunteers or the frontline workers are finding the solution, or there's top down where the CEO and the board leadership are saying, hey, here are the technology things we're going to adopt. We did a survey in a recent webinar where we said, has AI or the advancements in technology, is this a boardroom topic? And more than 50% of the respondents said, no, this is not a boardroom level topic. So I think, yeah, to your point, it makes it very important that the board, even if they're not aware or if they don't know what they don't know, as you mentioned, that they at least acknowledge, hey, these are the guidelines and the boundaries that we'd like the organization to adopt, or the goals that we'd like to adopt as we explore this new technology and its implications for our organizations.
I think that's so interesting. And I believe we've seen some parallels here with some research which the Charity Commission did. I can't remember the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it was under 10% of charity boards discussing AI, or certainly having AI on their radar. I'd need to check the specific source. But it was really low, really low. So definitely a point of comparison there. And I think what you have touched on there, Josh, which is absolutely right and really resonates with what I see in a lot of charities, is a real governance challenge, which is where leaders and boards might be almost in a different time zone around AI development. As you said, there's so much energy and grassroots innovation coming from staff and volunteers and frontline workers. And if CEOs and boards are not post that, then as you say, there's absolutely risks that can creep in, especially in such an area of fast moving change and fast-paced tech development as well. So yeah, that's a gap I'd love to see closed within the sector and outside the sector too.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that in mind, what do you think are some of the key developments in digital for charities in the last 24 months or in the year of 2024? What do you think are the real standout headlines there?
Yeah, so from our report, it was really interesting because there are some things I'm genuinely heartened and excited by. And there are also areas where I know there are a lot of charities want to develop further. So just to pull out a few key highlights from the most recent report, which came out in July of 2024, and there will be a new one in 2025 around the same time. So what's really heartening is that despite the fact that cost of living has been a real squeeze for charities' digital progress, and I can share some stats on that later on in our conversation, nevertheless, three quarters, so 76% of charities moved forward with digital this year. And I consider that to be a huge achievement because that is very hard won progress at a time when we know there's very little digital funding for charities out there, which I really hope will change. And secondly, that charities are under so much pressure to meet massive service delivery demands at a time when there's a shrinking pool of resources to meet that need. So well done to everyone who's moving forward because the environment is making it really, really tough. 41% of charities are using digital tools in their service delivery, and I suspect that's going to become even more complex and interesting in terms of how AI gets used as well. But again, it shows how digital is absolutely embedded in how charities work and how they interact with beneficiaries. Then one stat which got a lot of interest was the dramatic increase in AI usage by charities since 2023. So in 2023, just over a third, so that's 35% of charities were using AI. In July 2024, it went up to 61%, which is a massive increase. And those are the charities who are using AI tools in their day-to-day work and their operations. So it's starting to become business as usual. And that's really exciting. It's great to see all of that innovation taking place. But as we'll see as we get further into this conversation, a lot of that usage is, as you referenced earlier, quite organic. There are very few organizations that have got a really joined up strategic approach. So that is definitely something I would encourage charities to look at. And we can talk about how to do that as part of this session as well. But what again is really encouraging is that 80% of charities said that digital is a priority. And I think that is really heartening because post lockdown, one of my questions, as we continue to run the report was, are we going to see a bit of softening of support for digital? But that's absolutely not been the case. So, in summary, this is a sector that's making progress, that's doing some really exciting, innovative things with AI, is doing them in really difficult circumstances. And we need funders to come on board, we need support organisations to come on board and really support charities so they can go further and faster and do it safely.
Yeah, and I love that idea of further and faster, and of course safely. And I think one of the things that may not be overlooked, but um, in terms of digital transformation, I think a lot of organizations, board-led organizations, including nonprofits or charities, may see it as a challenge, but the flip side of that challenge is the opportunity. There are cost savings that are possible. There are time savings possible. It's possibly more effective and more efficient with the resources you've been given by your donors or your grantors. Um, what can leaders do to prepare for or support these challenges and maybe even turn those challenges into opportunities?
Yeah, so I think there's some the things which are maybe getting a little bit overlooked, understandably, because leaders are dealing with such big questions at the moment. But there are three things that I would recommend, and these are partly based on the challenges that we saw in the report. So I won't go into those in a huge amount of detail, but just to set the scene, we know that almost 7 out of 10 charities are struggling to progress digitally due to their finances, and surprise, surprise, that's due to the cost of living, but that's also having an impact in terms of the time that charities have to plan. So we know that 66% of charities are finding a lack of headspace and capacity is a real barrier to moving forward with digital. So I think there are three things that leaders can do about this. So the first thing is about skills support. So I know that it's very understandable when you're going through a really tough time financially that training budgets get cut and everyone focuses just on service delivery. And I know that's a huge thing we absolutely all need to do now. I definitely think that people are obviously charity's most important asset, as we all know, and supporting them to develop their skills is really, really key. And there are so many things that you can do internally, just with things like getting staff who are progressing with digital AI to run some lunch and learns, developing some reverse mentoring or some shadowing. Even spending a morning with a colleague who is doing something really innovative in terms of how they're using digital or AI. Just look at some of the free stuff you can do to get started. So I would definitely recommend that. And obviously, if you have more resource, then do some internal discovery, run a survey, do some interviews, and start to design a digital skills program. So I would definitely recommend that. And you need to give people a really clear sense of progress as well, because otherwise it just feels like, you know, a bit of nice learning, but where do you go next and how does it help you increase your impact and help the charity do more? So having some kind of skills support, skills program, if you've got the resource to do that. The second thing is making sure that you as a leader are giving staff and volunteers some headspace and some time to learn. And that is clearly at such a premium at the moment. As we know, based on everything we've talked about, all the challenges that we're facing in the UK charity sector at the moment. So I often get asked by leaders, how do we do that when there's so much going on? We'll look at where some of those touch points are. So it could be things like in the weekly staff meeting we have, then we're going to give some staff a chance to do some kind of show and tell, or the lunch and learns we talked about, or even maybe having an extra 10 minutes in your staff meeting to talk about things you have learned from maybe how your users are behaving a bit differently, how they're changing their behavior in terms of how they interact with your channels or your online services, just somewhere where staff and volunteers have some space to share what they have learned from your audience and how their digital behaviors and needs are changing, or alternatively what they've seen in other organizations. So they might say, oh, I've noticed these other charities, you know, there was a great case study about them on charity digital news this week, or maybe they're, you know, so we're not short of AI developments at the moment, right? What do we think some of these things could mean for us? So I think having that headspace and time to learn is really, really key. Then the final thing again really goes back to clarity as well. So having that really clear vision about what success looks like for your organization, but also maybe with all of the emphasis on cost, very understandably, maybe your transformation is going to be a 5-year rather than a 3-year program. Maybe you're going to have to be more ruthless about how you prioritize and how you invest at each stage. So I'd say if that makes your program of change more sustainable, it just needs to take a bit longer and you need to chunk up where you spend. That's probably a better way to do it rather than just going hell for leather on it and not being entirely clear what the focus is and what success looks like. You're
Yeah.
smiling there, Josh. Does this resonate
No,
with
yeah,
you?
because you're touching upon something that not to rush into my next question, but just anecdotally touching upon something that I found really powerful in my my development as a technology user. I consider myself pretty proficient and savvy. I have a number of staff under me, and one of the things that I found most powerful as an unlock to get them to be more comfortable with AI is to actually show them the workflows that I use. Here's a customer interview or a volunteer interview transcript. Here's how you can transport that and get it automated so you don't have to type everything out yourself. Here's how you can load that into an AI summarization tool so you can have the first draft of a case study or an interview already created for you. And then here's how you go back and clean that up using the skills that you already have, which I think harkens back to one of the things that you mentioned in terms of curiosity, is that everybody in terms of a technology learning curve is kind of on a different place. So I think acknowledging that and being willing to teach and learn at the same time is really interesting there.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think it needs to be really, really inclusive and it needs to look and feel inclusive because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people on this call today who have seen a number of different cycles of digital change, whether it was bringing in a CRM or going agile or introducing a bit more digital service delivery back in the day. And I think we've all seen situations where you have a bit of a group of people who are very close to the heart of the project and are very skilled up, and other people who may start to feel a little bit more peripheral. So I always think that if you really want to get good return on investment and maximum impact from anywhere where you are trying to change something, then you've got to look at the other people in the organization who you need to bring with you. And that might mean skilling them up or drawing on their use cases or their insights, or just what they're learning about your audience, so you can feed that into what you're developing as well. So they feel really involved and engaged. So that's something where I think leaders really need to apply some of their attention as well. How can we make change inclusive? How can we bring people with us? And what does that look like in terms of the project, but also some of our roles and responsibilities and how they might need to evolve?
And I love that you mentioned this is not the first digital change management that we've probably gone through. And I'm dating myself, but I still recall a time before email marketing was a specialty, especially for any kind of organization, before the internet had e-commerce or any of those things. So one of the things that I think about in terms of, especially from board leadership and executive leadership, is that this is not the first digital transformation that your organization has likely undergone. What were those key learnings from those previous transformations that you can carry over into this new technology? That said, I mean, let's get into the specifics of it. AI, wide adoption, democratized tools, lots of low-cost tools, lots of tools that are actually being made available in software you may already own. Do you think there's an overestimation on the impact of AI for the charity sector?
Well, it's a great question, because someone was asking me this yesterday and saying, "Oh, if we've been here with blockchain before, is it going to be like that?" I don't think it is. I mean, if you look at the charity digital skills report, if we go back to what charities themselves are saying, so in the report, so 65% of charities agreed or strongly agreed that AI developments are relevant to them, but only 22% feel prepared to respond to the challenges and opportunities. And actually, that data, which is from 2024, is not dissimilar proportionally to what we also saw in 2023. So I think if charities are saying that they feel that this is really relevant to them, then absolutely that's a sign that things are changing, as much as all the AI stories we're seeing in the news and what you and I will be seeing from the organizations we work with day to day. We know there's some really interesting examples out there, and I've obviously written about some of them. So a really nice case study is Save the Children UK. So they're currently working with Microsoft. They're using some really interesting pilot projects around Copilot, for example. I've got a really nice stat here. So more than 92% of the staff who participated, who are using AI, are on average saving 3 to 4 hours a week. And as a really nice additional benefit, they heard that neurodivergent staff and those who had English as a second language said that the tools fostered some more inclusive communication practice, such as helping them draft emails or documents. So I think that shows the transformative power of these tools. But of course, there's something additional as well, but beyond efficiency and productivity, important I know that is. And again, I'd love to signpost people to TLC, the Talk Listen Change charity, the amazing work they're doing. So they have a number of different things they're doing in AI, but I know they've done things like create an AI avatar to help them make training video development quicker. They're using AI to analyze client needs, looking at the data and the insights from that. And I know they've also used AI to help analyze staff feedback and develop their organizational strategy as well. So they're using it on a number of fronts. And I know that some of their teams have said that it's helped them be 50% more efficient, which is really impressive. So there's some really good change, some really amazing innovation happening across the sector. I think the big question for 2025 is, how do we scale that? And that is the question that I am hearing from a lot of charities this year. So 2024, the question I was often getting asked was, how do I use AI? How do I get started? What are other charities doing? The question I'm hearing most this year is, how do we do more of this, and how do we do it better? How do we make the case for investment? So more advanced, more sophisticated questions, but no magic bullet answers to those questions, sadly. Hopefully we'll get some good learnings about them from this year's report.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think about when I think about AI is, what, and you mentioned the productivity gains that are possible. What is the return on investment for investing the time to learn a new process or a new workflow involving AI? Especially when you consider that, a lot of what we do in our day-to-day lives is rote or kind of a manual process that could be automated or sped up. So just one example, even like you said, analyzing large troves of data. We have 10 customer interviews. What are the most impactful summarization themes that we can pull out of that? Looking at large spreadsheets to analyze trends and data that you might otherwise overlook or just not have the time to manually process yourself. So yeah, lots of opportunities there. But I guess from that cautious optimism, let's call it, what would you recommend that charity leaders need to know about AI before they adopt it? What are kind of not only the opportunities, but maybe some of the risks that they need to manage or mitigate as they introduce these new technologies?
Yeah, I think that's so important because there are some really careful, considered ways you need to bring AI into your organization. So there's three things that I recommend leaders do. So the first thing is, it's really easy, I think, to make an assumption as a leader that this is not happening in your organization, but I guarantee somehow, somewhere, it probably is, especially based on the data we've seen in the report. So I'd say the number one thing is talk to your staff, learn from your staff and volunteers. How are they using these tools? And even if you're also finding out how they're using these tools outside of work as well, that can be very interesting. But I'm sure there'll be someone somewhere in your organization who is using AI in some way. I'd be surprised if they're not. So starting to find out what are those use cases and documenting those use cases, and that probably sounds a little bit fancy, but that can just be some use cases on a whiteboard, just so you're starting to capture what's happening. And then, of course, the second part of that is about providing some really clear guidance to staff. So how they can use these tools safely. And a lot of that's going to come down to what data you can and can't put into these tools, especially sensitive data. And what I always think is a bit of a movable feast, is the different levels of permissions that there are. You have to check the T's and C's with the free tools and the paid tools, and to keep a close eye on them as they might change as well. So that's the other thing I'd recommend. Definitely provide some clear guidance to your team. And then thirdly, what I would love more leaders to do is to revisit their governance. So you talked about risk there. So if something goes wrong with AI, so for example, someone puts some sensitive data into a free tool that then gets thrown back into the model for training, or something else goes wrong with how you're using these technologies, firstly, how will that come to light in your organization? Do you have the right processes so you've got oversight of what could happen? And then how quickly can you act, and who's involved in making the decisions as well? Who's going to clean up after this crisis, and what are they going to do? So I think those three things: learning from your staff and volunteers, providing really clear guidance to your team, and then also revisiting your governance, and maybe even mapping it out and kicking the tires and seeing whether it's really going to be quick enough, have the right level of oversight to almost to spot things before they happen, is a really important thing where you can make a massive difference as a leader.
Yeah, and back to that, the differing levels of technology adaptness or adaptability among individual staffers. I think it's crucially important, especially from the board governance leadership all the way down to middle management and the grassroots staffers or volunteers, is that there's awareness of how these models work and what the guardrails are around, as you said, don't upload sensitive or confidential or intellectual property information into these publicly accessible models. And that may be even, saying, hey, use this model, not that model, or hey, we have an enterprise version of this that is safe and that protects our data. Because as you said, yeah, it could be uploaded into the learning machine and spit back out somewhere else, and you'd have no real awareness of that. Where do charity leaders start? You mentioned a couple of good starting points, but is it just that conversation at the next board meeting? Is it a conversation at the next staff meeting of how this works? Is it just getting that feedback that you mentioned, maybe putting out an informal email survey? How are you guys using AI? How do you see this as impacting our organization?
Yeah, so you want to get the lie of the land as a leader, don't you? You want to find out what's happening and where the risks are and the opportunities, and where you might need to put in some parameters, but also encourage staff to sort of take things forward as well. So I mean, some of this will come back to what you're trying to do and what success looks like. But what I would do if I was a leader and I thought, right, I've got to sort of start this tomorrow, is number one, find out what's happening, as we were saying, but also you probably want to move quite quickly towards that experimentation stage with really clear parameters around what staff can and can't do. So you might say, okay, so I've spoken to my team this week. I've discovered what people are doing. Feels like there are maybe 5 things here where we can start to experiment a bit. We're confident these tests are safe. So let's work out what that process looks like. Let's work out what governance looks like around it. And it could be a really simple thing. It could be, right, we're going to make sure we're using AI for our meeting notes as standard. We're going to use AI for drafting our social content, or you might be doing something more advanced around AI in service delivery or analysing data. Whatever you do, just identifying some areas to test. In the meantime, gathering some of those other wider use cases that we talked about. I do think there's a lot of AI business as usual going on in organizations now, where there's actually a lot of really rich learning and where the innovations of tomorrow might come from. So you want a bit of a process around that. And then you want to try and move forward to doing some prioritization as well. So you might find once you lift the lid, you have a lot more going on than you realize. So how are you going to prioritize those projects? How are you going to manage that portfolio? And that can mean deciding, well, what could be a big bet here? What could be a no-brainer? What might be something you put on the back burner? What might be something you just you park it? And I was talking to a really amazing charity yesterday who are prioritizing in terms of impact. So you talked about a return on investment. I think the other way to look at what success looks like, and you can obviously look at both, is, well, what's going to make the biggest difference here? What's going to support more of our beneficiaries or save staff time? So having some kind of clear framework, it can be a very simple 2x2 framework, but just a way that you can start to prioritize what you're going to do, what you're going to invest your efforts, and also your investing as well. And then I think documenting what you're doing, again, that can be really simple. It just can be some post-its on a whiteboard, or you can do it in more detail, whatever would work for your size of organization. But just having somewhere where you can capture those learnings, because there is so much learning going on in organizations at the moment in terms of AI, and the learning curve is often like that. So making sure that you are really capturing what's happening and what staff learnings are will be so important for the decisions you make in the next phase of adoption.
I really keyed in on the word documentation there, and I think what sometimes gets lost in digital transformation is the clear picture of the before and after. And there's certainly, as you mentioned, there's prioritization and right sizing. Is this a small opportunity, a medium-sized opportunity, a large opportunity for impact? But I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about AI is very few people are documenting, the time savings, the productivity increases. Even if it's something that process used to take me 2 hours, now takes me 15 minutes. If you extrapolate that over a full year, that's an enormous amount of time savings. So I think leaders and technology users would be well served to, at least in the beginning, to document what is that time savings and what does that look like year after year, because that does translate into more effective, efficient use of resources for charities.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant. Sorry to interrupt, Josh. I think
No.
you've made such a brilliant point there. I wanted to just share something I learned yesterday. So I was talking to an amazing charity, and in fact, it was a group of them, and that was exactly the thing we were discussing. So how do you get that baseline for example, this thing, as you were saying, it used to take 2 hours, but now it takes 15 minutes. So making sure that you take some time to do that, making sure that your data is accurate when you're doing that. And as you say, documenting it somewhere is really key. And I think where the magic starts to happen, as it were, is when you begin to do that more consistently, because some of those isolated examples, they're great. But if you can encourage, say, your whole team to do that, even if it's a small team, then as you say, then you start to get a sense of, well, what does overall value look like and return on investment? You have much more robust data, and that's where you can start to identify what difference does this really make. So you're absolutely right. I think getting that baseline is so important and an investment well worth making.
Yeah, and just top of mind as I'm currently working through my staff annual performance reviews, that data could be so powerful in a charity's annual report of, hey, we've saved
Mm.
this much time using AI, we're leading the way in technology, we're making more efficient use of the resources we've been given to us. I think it just uh, it may make a charity look like an outlier in terms of performance by being able to document those things.
I love that idea. AI adoption as part of demonstrating your impact. I would love to see that. I think it's a brilliant idea.
yeah. And then I guess to take it back to a smaller scale or a more day-to-day scale, what about day-to-day operations? I think the other side of the coin of AI is, yes, this is bleeding edge technology. It's becoming
Mm.
increasingly used in widespread use. But in then day-to-day operations, I think there's, and maybe I'm kind of mischaracterizing this a little bit, but I think there's an increasing expectation from all of our service receivers that there is some kind of tech forward adoption. Um, so maybe I'm muddling the question a little bit there, but in terms of day-to-day operations, where do you see the application for AI?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about some of the examples already and really learning from staff. But I think there's a couple of other things that leaders should be thinking about. So I think this is a term that sometimes we don't spend enough time discussing in the charity, but capabilities, what is possible? So sure, you can learn a lot from talking to staff and volunteers and how are they using our, what are they doing, what are the benefits of doing so. For me, I think there's real merit in looking at, well, actually, what would our capabilities allow us to do? So a really simple example of that is we all know that there are more, as you mentioned, AI integrations coming into the tech tools that we're even really simple, brilliant ones like Canva, for example, and just working out, well, what are we using and what new AI features or capabilities do they have, which maybe you're not using yet, and can we test them and what can we learn from them? So I think now is as good a time as any to look at your tech stack and what the AI capabilities are. And of course, also looking at your staff capabilities as well. So a really common example I see is that if you've got a digital team or a tech team who are really AI and digitally savvy and skilled, but the rest of the organization isn't there yet, that for me feels like a very key and critical gap to close because you're not going to be able to scale without it. So that is the other thing I'd recommend. So really having a good look at capabilities. And then I don't know whether this might be a little bit of a hand grenade in this conversation, but I was at an event yesterday with the lottery and they were talking about their AI principles. And it was so interesting because one of them, which I think is brilliant, is about not using AI for AI's sake. So one of their 10 AI principles, which are really good, by the way, and I highly recommend looking at them, is using AI in a meaningful way. So it's got to be targeted, it's got to support positive change. So, I think we've all in the habit, aren't we, sometimes of having Claude or Gemini or Copilot or something else, one of these AI tools just open on another tab and just dipping into it. And whilst that's great for learning, I know we're all starting to get more conscious about the environmental and the energy impact of using these tools. So I really like that provocation from the lottery around, well, is it going to make a difference here? And just having that moment to consider, is it really going to be useful? Is it going to make a difference? And that learning comes from confidence and skills, doesn't it? Trying these tools out and working out where they're going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, and one of the things I think about there too, just as somebody who's a writer and a storyteller and interested in content and creative, is there's certain risks associated, like what you said, that if you're becoming very ubiquitous in your use of AI, oh, I can just put that into an email. I think humans are much more refined in terms of awareness of, is that a real human message? So if you are, trying to, ask a donor for funds or something like that, maybe AI can assist, and I love Microsoft calls it Copilot because it's an assisting tool, not the only tool that you should be using. So yeah, I agree with you there. I guess the next theme in our conversation is, we're already in this very future forward 2025. If you asked me 10 years ago, if we'd all be using AI in our daily lives, I would say no, that's that seems like the future. But I think people who are looking at the next horizon want to know what is coming next for charities in this space. What are the next 12 months or the next calendar year look like in terms of technology adoption and AI in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, goodness me, there's so much coming down the track. So, one of the people I always look to for great advice about this stuff is Tim Cook from AI Confident. Do go and check out his work. And one of the things that he's really got me thinking about is agents. So, I think agents are starting to come on stream now, aren't they? I believe that Microsoft has got an agents product. And for anyone who hasn't come across agents before, they are tools which basically can complete and manage subtasks from other AI tools. So that really does begin to feel like we're moving into a new world where you can very meaningfully delegate to AI. So the example that Tim gave me when I was writing an article just before Christmas was about, well, if you are running, for example, some kind of I don't know, animal welfare shelter, you could use an agent to help you sort out your scheduling or to look at, allocation of how you can manage the levels of food and those sorts of things. So really coming in and acting like another member of the team, which is really exciting. Tim and I have talked about how these tools they can potentially create an additional level of risk, because this is where we start to see AI moving into a realm of having much more autonomy, having a much clearer role in terms of decision making, which is both a good thing and perhaps sometimes a risk in the context of a charity in particular. So, what I'd say about all of this, whether it's a new tool or indeed what you might be starting to get off the ground in I think this is a moment when good old fashioned service design and process mapping really needs to come to the fore. The more you can understand what are the different steps in this process, and if you are introducing AI into them, where risk might creep in, and how you can anticipate that and mitigate that, and of course test these processes really, really carefully to make sure that you're minimizing the chance of risk, then that is a really good thing to do. So that's the first trend that I would highlight. Second trend, just briefly, I know we want to get on to some Q&A in a moment, but some people may have seen in sector news that yesterday we were involved in launching a charity AI task force, which is really going to be focused on helping to create more of a collective voice for AI in civil society and helping influence responsible, ethical, and inclusive use of tech within and outside of the sector. I really want to hear from more people about their views on how to do that. If you go to CAST's website, they've got a page set up for the task force, and there's a mailbox there where you can send us your messages. And Dan Such and I, who I'll be co-chairing the task force with, we'll be keeping a really close eye on that, and we're going to look at how we can involve more voices across the sector. So really hopeful that that will help charities move forward with AI and also learn from and build on all the amazing work and innovation and examples that are already going on across the sector.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And one thing you mentioned that I kind of glommed onto is that a lot of the decision making, if you're going to be automating a process or a workflow, it should be AI informed but human confirmed to make sure that you're
Nice.
there. Yeah. It looks like there's a lot of great information or a lot of great questions in the Q&A. So I think Tara, we'll turn it over to you to go ahead and start the Q&A portion of the presentation because I think there's more than we can possibly get to here. So I don't know, Tara, if you want to start us off with the first question.
Hello, yes, thank you both so much. That was a really, really interesting start and main segment. And yeah, I'll get started. So a lot of these look to be focused on AI, and I know you guys have touched quite a lot upon different AI aspects already. The first question comes from Becky, who asks, who said, I'm interested to understand where the growth and development in AI and digital adoption is happening. So Becky's interested in knowing if you guys feel that smaller charities are being left behind compared to bigger orgs who might be making bigger strides in comparison.
I'm happy to kick off on that, and Josh, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, we have definitely seen that AI is widening the gap between large and small organizations. We're definitely seeing that in the report. So, for example, we're seeing in terms of skills and capacity, that's actually a bigger challenge for smaller organizations. So overall, I think it was 50% of charities, but for small charities, skills and capacity, 60% of them say that that's a real challenge. And 30% say that there's a need for board education, which is not dissimilar to the overall data actually, but it also shows how we need to get more digitally and AI savvy trustees into charities of all sizes. Just in terms of use of AI tools, which I think is a really interesting one, and this really shines a light on the gap that I mentioned earlier. So 78% of large charities are using AI tools, and there are less small charities using those tools. So that's 53%. And I'm really keen, whether it's through the digital code of practice update that we're working on when Charity Digital are doing a huge amount of work on, or whether it's through the task force as well, all the other AI initiatives going on across the sector, that we start to close this gap between large and small charities, because otherwise we're going to see even more of a digital divide emerging. And I think part of that is about making sure that the small charities have resourcing from funders. It may also be about large charities reaching out to small charities in their network and offering to support them. That could be just doing some Skillshare or just coming in to talk about a case study. So I'd encourage large charities to look at where they might be able to use their convening power, because the more everyone's peer organizations are skilled up, the more you can do together, the more you might be able to collaborate on building AI products and services. And that's where some really exciting stuff could start to happen for civil society. So we all need to work out who we're going to work with and how we can support them to get the most out of our collaborations.
And I would add to that, there's also a number of organizations, obviously, that are championing the use of technology, especially in cost-effective ways for smaller organizations. Charity Digital, obviously. Microsoft has a Tech for Social Impact program that makes technologies, including AI, Copilot, those types of things, more affordable. And one of the most interesting trends that I think in just the overall AI market, you may have heard of DeepSeek. They are essentially making AI cheaper, faster, and with a much reduced investment. So I think there's even more democratization and more kind of cost-effective AI coming on the horizon.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. They were really interesting perspectives. Yeah, great information. The next question, conscious of time, so I'll try and get through them. It comes from Funmi, who I know well from Brent Carer Centre. So great to have you with us, Funmi, along with everyone else. And Funmi asks, where can we find companies with social impact programs that will be willing to help us implement our plans and use the latest AI technology to help us become more efficient? And Josh, I know you just touched on Microsoft TSI and some of the help they're providing, but yeah, perhaps I can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, Microsoft TSI is a great example. And they also have some really great resources in terms of setting the guidelines and the framework for responsible and ethical use of AI. So I think that's a really great resource, and that they have a lot of like thought leaders, and you can use their enterprise level, or the billions of dollars that they've invested in their AI to transport that into your charity. And not being in the charity sector myself, but working with it, I think peer learning is probably one of the most important things. Networking, conferences, those types of things, seminars, keynotes that you can learn from your peers or your fellow colleagues in the charity world. Zoe, you probably know much better than I, though.
No, I would agree with you. I've been really impressed by the work that Microsoft are doing around social impact and AI, and they're really investing and really listening to the sector as well, which I think is great. And I'd love to see more companies follow in their footsteps. And as you say, Josh, we're not short of AI events out there in the sector, and there are lots of peer learning networks. So I absolutely encourage everyone to seek out some of those networks as well, because they may not be that visible. Ask other charities, where are you learning about this stuff? What communities are you part of? Where are you getting your information? And there are so many great resources out there. So I think that's a really great way to find out where all the insights are coming from.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. And great last point there, Zoe, because I know in a lot of work we do, we see that charities have a real good sense of community and helping to share recommendations with each other. And yeah, really be supportive. So that's excellent. And I'll move on to the next question, which comes from David. And David has shared some thoughts around the fact that AI is a really sort of broad term that can have different meanings across sort of different industries and within different contexts, and can sort of touch on anything from machine and visual learning to autonomous flights to generative AI. And in order for charities to really understand the potential of AI tools, David asks if we perhaps need to be a little bit more specific when talking about it. Josh, I can see you.
Yeah, from my perspective, and I've had the pleasure of working with a number of different just AI experts in some of the webinars that I've conducted. I think it really does come down to what we call kind of marketing and a t-shirt sizing or a right sizing. In that AI has been around for quite a while. It's actually been 10, 15, 20 years that we've all been using AI. If you've ever interacted with a call tree on a phone system, when you've called in somewhere and you've been put on hold and you have to push a number to get to the right department, that's an AI example. So yeah, I think it is. I would agree with you, David, that it's a very kind of nebulous, just like this big kind of I don't know what it is thing. So I think it comes back to right sizing and prioritizing. Is this a small task that can be assisted with generative AI, with like a Gemini or a easy to use low cost tool? Is this a medium sized task, such as some data analytics or some visual recognition, pattern recognition, things like you're talking about? Is this a very large task where we're trying to integrate enterprise level AI throughout our entire organization? So I think there's a right tool and a right fit for each of those task sizes. But I do agree with you that it's a very ambiguous term. It's very cloudy. There's so much news and information out there about AI all over the place that it does cause some confusion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So often I'll talk to people about AI, and then you realize that they are talking about ChatGPT, or they've got a very specific product in mind. And David, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you, Josh. I mean, this technology is kind of started to emerge in the 1950s, didn't it? And we're all interacting with these tools every day. Whether it is getting served product recommendations when you buy something on Amazon, that's machine learning in practice, or if you use your face recognition to unlock your phone, that's behavioral biometrics. So I think for me, this organizational definition of AI is a really key thing, in the same way that I'd say an organizational definition of what digital was 4 or 5 years ago. And the way we tend to define it is when computer systems learn or problem solve in a way that mimics how humans do it. And I'm very specifically using the term mimic there, because we're not at a stage of that kind of minority report fueled future where these technologies are actually thinking and have consciousness, but maybe that will come around sooner than we all think. But that is the really key thing. I mean, what we do when we're drafting AI policies is to have that very tangible definition of AI, and then to say, well, here are some different types. So whether it's generative AI, whether it's machine learning, whether it's chatbots, and to give some very relatable, very day-to-day examples before you start to move into this is how we're going to use it in our organization and what we're going to not do and data and all the things you'd normally put in a policy. But I do think we need to set that lens quite widely, because I think that if you have an AI policy that just covers, say, generative AI, which I know some organizations are doing, I feel that's perhaps a bit of a narrow lens. I think you do need to look at all the different ways in which AI can be used, because otherwise that's where risk could potentially creep in, would be my take on it.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, thank you both so much. And so that last point that you covered may lead quite well into the next question, because also coming from David, David just went on to mention about the risks of generative AI and the risk of sort of data loss prevention, and looking at the fact that we all use policies for things like use of social media, but should we have similar processes and policies in place in relation to generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely should. If you don't have a AI policy yet, you definitely need to look at how you can develop one. So I would recommend some of the resources that are out there. You know, I know Charity Excellence has some really good AI policy resources. As Josh mentioned, Microsoft also has some really good resources, so that's well worth looking at. I think the key thing with any of these templates is you need to really adapt it to your context. So this is where doing the work that I talked about earlier, where you talk to staff, you talk to volunteers, you understand what those use cases are, and then take a step back to look at what the risks are and how you can mitigate those, is really important in informing the policy. And I see this document being a little bit like how social media policies were positioned in organizations back in the day, which is it's got to be a living, breathing thing. You will need to be reviewing that policy probably every quarter, maybe even more frequently, because these technologies are changing so quickly.
Yeah,
Josh,
I would
you'd like
100% agree. Yeah, I think you're going to see AI use policies become part of that annual policy training, those annual rules, guidelines, just like you've seen harassment and cybersecurity creep into almost every kind of annual employee or staff training. I think it's super important, especially as David said, that it's so nebulous and there's so many different tools and applications that people need to be reminded that you cannot use confidential information. You cannot upload our sensitive organizational information to one of these tools unless it's been vetted and approved. It's just going to have to be one of those things where it's the message repeated and repeated and repeated over and again, so that everybody understands it and has real clarity into what the guardrails are.
Yeah, that reinforcement and that training is really key. Definitely an analogy, as David said there. I think a really good parallel. And I love the way you phrased that question, David, because we have been here before with social media, haven't we? And that training and that reinforcement is so important, especially because the technology is changing so quickly.
Thank you both. We've got probably time for just one last question, because we need to wrap up, but it's a really interesting question from a fundraising angle. So Yaya mentioned that it's really critical for newer charities especially to really hit the ground running with fundraising, and asked how AI can assist in identifying potential donors and optimizing fundraising campaigns, building stronger relationships with supporters to ensure sustainable growth. So I don't know if that's something that you'd be happy to touch upon, just to finish off.
Yeah, I'll start, but then I'd love to have Zoe conclude. I think one of the greatest benefits of AI is you're basically getting access to all human knowledge that's available. So you could, if you wanted to hit the ground in a fundraising program, you could ask the tool, hey, develop a fundraising program for XYZ with a charity of this goal. we believe our constituents or our most likely donors are XYZ. Give me a tailored message or a set of tailored messages that could apply to this group with this set of characteristics, with this end goal in mind for the fundraiser. And I think you'll find it can give you some really comprehensive results that are really interesting, that then you can kind of customize and tailor to fit for your actually unique needs. But that's the greatest use of AI that I've seen, is that it gives you a really great starting point for any kind of new project or initiative, as it's learning from all the other projects and initiatives that it knows about, and giving you kind of the basic building blocks that you need. Zoe?
Yeah, so it's really important when you're looking at targeting donors and using AI to do that, is to really stay within GDPR. So if you look at some of the well-known case studies that are out there, like the stuff of Parkinson's UK, they've done some great work using a tool called Dataro in order to better target donors. That was very much about existing donors. So do have a look at that, and do go and talk to them as well, because I know they're really great and really collaborative about discussing what they have learned. And absolutely, you can use those kind of predictive analytic tools to look at your past performance and how your donors have given, how they've behaved, and what that might mean for how you then target appeals. But yes, you definitely want to make sure you are using these tools in a way that is 100% compliant with GDPR.
Thank you both so much. That was yeah, really, really interesting session. I'm afraid we do need to wrap up there because of the time. And thank you everybody who joined. Thanks so much for questions, and sorry that we didn't quite get through them all. But I know that Josh and OnBoard and Zoe will be more than happy to help anybody who wants to reach out following on from the session. So yeah, thank you very much again to Zoe and Josh. Oh, sorry, I've just had something pop up on my screen there. Yeah, it was a really, really fantastic webinar today. So just before we go, I wanted to let everybody know that we do have another webinar session coming up on Thursday the 20th. So next Thursday, on getting your board on board with AI. So quite nice in terms of the topic, following on from today. And that will be with Microsoft, and we'll pop a link in the chat to that webinar for anybody who is available and would like to sign up and join. So yeah, just before we finish, if you could please share your feedback with us, that would be really very appreciated. We will pop a link in the chat, and you'll receive a prompt sort of when you finish, and leave the session as well. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.